In this section, I'm going to talk about the settings. In order to have a viable, meaningful discussion, it's crucial that the settings are set appropriate. The nice thing is that those settings are going to be very similar from one type of forum to the next, with the exception of the prompt. The prompt that you give the student for what they need to do within the discussion will vary by how that layout is set, and I'll show you each of those. And in the following section on this, you can enter in as a student and you'll see what the student sees, so there'll be some logic in how you tell them to interact with the interface of the discussion tool. So let's go right now to the settings themselves. And now here you'll see at the bottom of this there is no date function, because when you put in a discussion, it is open at that time unless you go in and then hide it, and then you yourself manually open that sometime beforehand, or it's in a section that's hidden. Therefore, obviously, the discussion will be hidden until you open the section. That said, availability isn't really availability. It's just the due date and the cutoff date. It is unwise to make those dates separate or different. That way you won't know when to start grading. I will also point out that you always want to set activity completion if your students are expecting a little green check mark for when they have this done. And keep in mind that there's 3 kinds of discussions where the students enter a discussion topic, and there's 2 kinds where all they're doing is replying. So for the 2 standard forums and for each person posts one discussion, for all 3 of those, students can post a discussion topic. For the other 2, the Q&A forum, which is basically asking them to reply to a question you asked, or a single simple discussion. Also, you're asking them to reply to a question you asked as well as each other. For those 2, all they ever do is reply. So when you set up the completion statements, it's probably best to not say they're required to start a discussion on the 2 where that's not possible. These will populate at the top of the discussion, and they will see that they have to create a discussion or add replies. They'll see that number up there when they open the discussion themselves. So let's go back to the top. I strongly recommend that you use display word count so that especially our novice students don't have to guess at what you think is a reasonable entry. Students can go too short or too long. There's no sense not giving them some direction if they're new at this. And above that, where it says how many files will be attached, let's assume for your discussions you're probably not going to have them attach any files. So that's on by default. It should be off. This is off by default. It should probably be on. Subscription and tracking is just about getting an email that they are a part of this. Now, it may not be something that a student who's in a lot of these wants to get a whole bunch of emails for these, and they can keep up with that on their own. They can log in themselves and they can subscribe themselves, but generally they don't know what that means. So here I recommend, unless you want them to get emails, you say it's disabled. Or if you want them to get emails, say it's enabled. And there again, that has to do with the size of your class and how advanced your students are. And you shouldn't have to change any of these. We will discuss grading at some length. Ratings we've already covered that we don't need. Restrict Access has its own tutorials within the LMS Resource Guide. Once again, we've already done activity completion. Copy Leaks is another plagiarism program we're experimenting with that you can use. I've set this up in the demo versions of the discussions in the next section of the LMS Resource Guide if you want to take a look at those. And then Turnitin, I don't know anyone who's using Turnitin for their discussions. And then competencies you won't have to worry about. So that really walks through all the settings that you have to do. And I always will recommend that if you have done this, you can always copy a forum and put it somewhere where it's hidden that students can't see it, and then you can fill it with a different post every time. That way the one you want, you don't have to recreate every time. You just have to change the information in there and make it available. Okay, so that's all we need to know about settings. For each of these, you'll have to decide how you want to grade it, obviously. Not all forums have to be graded. If you choose not to and you have no grade, that makes sense for some of these. That said, otherwise you'll have to have a strategy, and that will be partly determined by how many people you have in your class. If you have 3 classes of 30, you're probably going to want to make your discussion forums manageable. You also can break them into groups, which is something we'll just barely touch on here today. Okay, so let's just assume that you want to have just standard grading, that you want to go in and give them a score for this. Make sure the score is logically the size it should be for your course. If you have a whole lot of things going on and only 10% of your grade grade is the discussion forums, then if you call each discussion forum worth 10 points, that will translate in their head to that's how important this is for the course. If discussion is huge in your course and you're going to make it half of your score, then making them each worth 100 points would be sensible. If you understand, we're just trying to telegraph to the student how important this is. And this is true of all grading, not just forums. For the average person, I would imagine making your forums worth 10 points or 25 points is probably going to be appropriate for how important it is to the overall class. Before I show the different types of grading methods, a quick aside. Down here where I'm pulling up whole form grading, I want it to be points. I can make it none, as I indicated earlier, if you don't want to have any points. If you use scale, that's going to ask you for a different kind of a scale that is built into the machine here. And then you also still have to choose the other grading method. Don't fall for scale. Don't use that, please. And then you can use points, or you can say no score at all. But if you're saying points, then you have some choices to make right here. For all of these, as we showed earlier, in the grading section, you have grade as one of your options. Now, these have already been set up, so it won't be raw as we get into it. But this one here is set up for just a simple discussion grading. And if I scroll down, you'll see the maximum grading here I've got as 10. But this is simple direct grading. So let's take a look at how that works. If you're familiar with the Open LMS for some time ago, you'll see that the way we grade is a little different. What we have to do is when it's time to grade, you come up and you click as though you're going to participate in it. And as a faculty member, when you click on that, what you get is you'll get this breakout where all the students are, but you'll also see this indication to grade users. So as I click that, it's going to show me all the discussions that this student has started and all of her replies. Now for this student, she's only done one so far. Now over here, I've already graded it, but say I wanted to make it something else. Yeah, it says it's only worth 10 points, but I want to put in 13. I hit enter and it goes, oh, you can't do that. I can also click up and down here, but still it doesn't tell me, it doesn't make me stop at 10. But you know, as you do this, just be conscious of that. In terms of sending notifications to students, I would assume that you wouldn't have to do that, but if you prefer, you certainly may. Now, with that said, I don't have to hit save. I'll just go to the next student and it automatically saves, and you'll see these two icons here. This means the little grading tool is open. This means it's closed. Let's see, so I've got 10, I can advance here, and I'll go to the next student. Once again, this student hasn't replied to others, but I can still give her whatever score I choose. So for this, she's done 1 out of 3. I'm going to make that a failing score, but I try to avoid scores much below 5 just because mathematically it will really mess up a student. I now go to the next student. Okay, now this student has posted, and this student has also replied to someone else. And you can see this says discussion started by Carly, and this is Carly, so this is her initial start of a discussion. And this is one of her replies. In this case, perhaps I think she should get 7. And then I move forward. Now you'll see there isn't a place where I can make additional comments here, and there's not a place for me to give any kind of video feedback or audio feedback. All I've got with this and the simple grading is putting in basically a simple score. And this individual, if I scroll down, I can see that Devin has been doing quite a bit of this. Now this is a discussion he started, but this is his response to this individual, and that if you need to see the entire discussion, you can click View Discussion in any of these, and it'll open up so that you can get a sense of where his response was in regard to everyone else's, if you need context for your grading. And now this is just simple direct grading, and that's all there is to that. If I want to come back here later, if I hit save now, basically I know that one's saved, and I don't have to go to the next individual, but still, that's simple direct grading. The next type of grading we'll discuss is rubric grading, and once again I come here to set this up initially. Now I have already done this, so some of it will be grayed out because I have already set this, and you can't change it after you've started grading, and in these I already have. But nonetheless, I'll come down here and I select rubric. Now with that, this is an advanced grading function. You'll go through, you'll set this all up, but until you log in a second time, you won't be able to set up the rubric unless you go to the drop down and choose advanced grading. But I'll show you how that looks, and I have several choices here. I've chosen rubric, and now That has already been set up correctly. I gave this a maximum grade of 20. Let's take a look at what that looks like to use when you're grading. Same as before, I come over here, I hit grade users, and now what this is, this adds an efficiency because I want to put more information than just like a 10 out of a scale of 1 to 10 or a 7. Now what I can do is I have set up this rubric, and I'm not going to be showing you how to set these up in this, but I will have another lesson on setting up a rubric in the LMS resource guide itself, but it's pretty easy to do. Once again, this opens and closes it, and then I can go through and I can see she was required to have one discussion topic, so I put in a criteria of one discussion topic with just a few choices there. I'll only give a 0 if they don't do anything. I then tend to default with a C, and then the perfect answer on just this first discussion topic is a 10. Now I can also put in some additional feedback here, so that makes it also valuable. And then the reply, now imagine that this person had a reply here, I could have put something in. Instead I have not submitted, and then not submitted. And then I go to the next student. And then now we're looking at this individual who did post his recipe as he was supposed to. So that's correct, that he gets 10 for that. And then for this response and that response, I thought those were terrific. He gets 5 for each of those. And then it still has the feedback for each of those if I need to put in a couple of words, which makes this very efficient because you can just rifle through these really rapidly, and anytime something's an outlier that it's terrific or an outlier that maybe it's not appropriate, you can indicate what's going on with that there. So the rubric is really an efficient method for racing through these while you still have several different things you could say, and your rubrics can be a whole lot more sophisticated than not as set, not submitted, not as requested, obviously. So let's go on to the next. With the rubric, one can have several criteria. The criteria I was using was their initial discussion, which I said was worth 10 points, then 1 reply, 2 replies, each worth 5, which seems reasonable to me. And then I had some simple little marks on there. You can make them more complex if you'd like, but as I said, we're working on a 10-point scale, so any way you want to break out your criteria so they reflect that 10-point scale makes sense. And it can be fairly complicated. If you want to just use a binary, did they do A, did they do B, did they do C, to binary, then for that you're probably going to want to use a checklist grading. Now checklist grading is just saying, hey, did you do it? It's a quick verification method for checklist grading. I click on the form that I set up earlier for that, and it works the same way as the previous one did. I go to grade users, same as before, and now what I've got here is I've got the same kind of a layout we've already seen. I have this individual who's done a couple of these here. What I can do is I can just say, yes, that was submitted, and yes, they did reply 1, yes, they did reply 2, and I can put some feedback if I want to, and then I'm on to the next individual. And one can see the strengths and weaknesses with that as basically a fashion for assessment. And the final grading method we'll look at just real quickly is called the marking guide, and I'll show you how that works. Same as before, I'll come in here and hit grade users. Also same as before, we have a discussion started by this individual is going to be her initial post. And then she is responding to this individual here. And then on these, I'm just going to put in a score out of 10 for each of these. I could put in some more comments if I want. Same thing here. And then lastly, now I'm not sure why this is superior to any others, and I really don't see it as strong as a rubric, but if you see this as a good match for you, then setting it up is pretty easy, and marking it is pretty easy, and getting around in it is much the same as we saw before. And that's marking guides. Thanks.